Al from Douglasville, Georgia said, have you done that hinge game segment for this year yet? Al, no, we have not. And Al's talking about something we do every year where we start to look at the whole schedule grid, and I pick out the games that the entire season is going to hinge on. And it's not always these marquee matchups featuring top 5 versus top 5. Sometimes it is, but it's almost common sense those are hinge games. Let me give you an example. Texas A&M at Miami in week 2. That's a hinge game. Think about the divergent paths that these two teams' respective seasons will take based on the outcome of that game. It's a non-conference game. It's week 2, but yet I'm looking at teams here that don't have playoff hopes necessarily. They've got hopes, but no one's talking about Miami and A&M in the playoff picture. So you may think, why are you picking this game as a hinge game? Because they both have sky-high standards and expectations. Texas A&M and Miami truly, as a fan base, fancy themselves as programs that, when things are right, should be in the thick of the playoff conversation. They're not wrong. Things just haven't been right. They're not wrong about that. Well, the point is, it's a fact they're going to play each other in week 2, and it's a fact one of them's going to win and probably inflate the bubble a little bit too much when it comes to expectations, but here's the downside. One of them's going to lose. That's also a fact. And so before they even get in conference play, either A&M or Miami's already going to have a loss. Don't really care what the score is, but if it's embarrassing, that's its own kettle of fish, as Meemaw would say. Texas A&M, I just want to paint you a frightening picture here. Let's say Texas A&M goes down there and loses. They will already be 1-1 with games against Auburn, Arkansas neutral site, against Bama, at Tennessee, South Carolina, at Ole Miss, Mississippi State, and at LSU still to go. The standard is not let's make a bowl there. The standard is not let's get back to 7 or 8 wins. They don't have time for that, nor should they have time for that. So I'm not criticizing you guys. And conversely, down at Miami, if they lose that game, and if they're, let's just say they're 1-1. I don't want to overlook Miami of Ohio. Someone warned me about that the other day. Let's just, for the sake of fun here and time constraints, let's say they're 1-1. Miami's got a really treacherous road when it comes to ACC play. So they would still have games at North Carolina, Clemson, at NC State, at FSU, Louisville. They go to Boston College in late November. Ugh, that's doing you no favors if you live pretty much anywhere, but especially in South Florida. So anyway, my point is, if they've already got a loss before they get into those weeds, it is not going to be pleasant. That is a major hinge game. Also in week 2, in fact, I've got 3 of them in week 2. In Tuscaloosa, Texas at Alabama in week 2 is the definition of a hinge game. If you told me this was the game you were looking most forward to out of any game on the schedule this year, I wouldn't push back too hard on you. And that's not even a conference game. But there's a funny thing, really funny thing about Bryant-Denny Stadium and the reputation there. When you see all these lists, when Big Game Boomer, for instance, goes down the route of putting out a list of the most hostile stadiums, when Brandon Walker makes a mistake and starts to talk, period, and he happens to choose to talk about the most hostile environments in college football, Bryant-Denny Stadium's never on the list. It's never in the top 3 or top 4, and if you didn't know any better, this is probably a good time for our buddy the Alien to check in. Our buddy the Alien portals down. Hey, buddy. And he says, why is this cathedral in Tuscaloosa where they put 101,000 plus in there every Saturday? You got to imagine him talking in his vernacular. Why is it not on the hostile stadiums list? And I would say to the Alien, they've been too good. And he would say, that does not compute. That does not compute where I'm from. And I would tell him, yeah, well, here's the thing about it. Humans down here, we have a thing called complacency. And we have a thing called getting drunk on success. And when you win a whole lot, you never feel threatened. Bama fans never feel threatened at home. They never feel threatened. They never, or hardly ever, go into their home venue as anything less than a 3+ touchdown favorite. The last time I was in that building and they felt threatened as a collective was 2019 when Joe Burrow and Ed Orgeron and LSU came in there. Bama fans legitimately thought they could lose that day even if they did most things right. As a result, the place was on fire. Unbelievable. You could take that stadium that afternoon and I'd put it against pretty much anything. It's just they rarely feel that way. Well, they will feel that way on this night, is my point. And they'll feel that way, for that matter, when LSU comes in there, and they'll feel that way when Tennessee comes in there. And so if you're a season ticket holder for Alabama and you've been force-fed a crap schedule in the recent past, not this year. Get your money's worth this year. I'm looking forward to it for that reason. I'm looking forward to this for the same reason we looked forward to Boss Man versus Undertaker, Hell in a Cell at WrestleMania 15, and we all remember how that turned out. A man's hanging from the roof, and the commentator is screaming, "Is this symbolic? Is this man hanging? Is this symbolic?" If Texas wins against Alabama, is it symbolic? And you know where I'm going with this. Way too much would be made of one outcome, but that's what we do in college football. It would be the old changing of the guard. It would be Texas is back. I mean, can you imagine? They wouldn't even bother to hit the caps lock button and lowercase it. It would just be Texas is back, all caps, and then maybe your subheadline is Nick Saban leaving? Is Alabama not ever going to be what they were? There's always that. That's the nature of a hinge game, but there's a flip side to the hinge game. What if Bama just wins 47-23? What if they just run Texas out of the building? And all of a sudden you look at them and say, hold up now. Thought they were supposed to have a weakness offensively. 23 points. Well, that Texas offense looks like the secondary carried their water effectively, but, I mean, what if Bama just rolls? You know? That's that team that's supposed to have a little Achilles heel, if you will, this season offensively. What if they run the ball against Texas like Michigan did against Penn State last year? What if they do that? What if that's the outcome? So it's a hinge game, friends, a big-time hinge game. There is no margin for error. Whoever loses this one, when it comes to the playoff, you leave Tuscaloosa that night 1-1. If you're Texas, thanks for scheduling up. Everyone just thinks you are what your record says you are at the end of the day, and so the committee will not really care that you scheduled up, and ditto with Alabama. So that's a big-time hinge game. Also in Week 2, G5 Josh is here to let you know that Tulane, out of all the G5 programs, has the highest preseason win total in all of college football. Yay! And they've got one Power 5 opponent on their schedule and a sweet logo in that order. And it's Ole Miss. Ole Miss comes in there in Week 2. You heard me right. Ole Miss goes to Tulane in Week 2. What's going to happen that afternoon is a massive, massive hinge moment for college football. Because if you're trying to find that G5 team to be your playoff buster this year, it can't be UCF. They're not there anymore. Can't be Houston. Can't be Cincinnati. It can't be some of the old reliable go-tos. They're not there anymore. So what are you left with? Well, you're left with programs like Tulane. Tulane, most recently noted for going 2-10 one year and 12-2 the next year. Most recently noted for beating USC in the Cotton Bowl. It's the only Power 5 opponent on their schedule, this Week 2 game against Ole Miss. So it'll be whatever a Super Bowl atmosphere is down there, be a Super Bowl atmosphere. They needed a springboard year, too. So if you remember Cincinnati, when they made the playoff a couple of years ago, not only did they have a good enough year that year, but they were already on everyone's radar because of the previous year. And so that's normally what it takes for the G5. And it's no different with Tulane. They popped on everyone's radar last year, so people will take them seriously enough this year where if they beat Ole Miss, they make a statement against them, and then they run the table and some other things fall their way, which is the way it should be if you only play one Power 5 team, they could make the playoff. Ole Miss, if they were to lose that game, their remaining schedule. Colin, do we have that, by the way? Because I did not even write it down. Irresponsible, I know. The Ole Miss schedule, you know it. They got to play in the SEC West. So if they start 1-1, they got Georgia Tech the next week, and then they go to Bama. They got LSU. They got Arkansas. They go to Auburn. They got A&M, at Georgia, at Mississippi State. It's just brutal. And so I would recommend, I don't know if Lane Kiffin's watching tonight, I would recommend just going ahead and winning the game. If they do win that game, you have greatly reduced the likelihood that you have a G5 team in the mix come season's end. Let's go to Week 8, and let's hop on the old PJ. Let's go all the way out to the West Coast, and let's go to USC. You know who they play in Week 8? They play Utah. Remember that game last year? You should be asking me which one. They played in Salt Lake City. I think it was 43-42, something like that. And then they played again in the Pac-12 championship game, and Utah rolls. You had the Caleb Williams injury. He still played, but he was injured. Utah won. They went 2-0 against them last year. And all they have this year to show for it is a preseason win total of 8.5, while Southern Cal's sitting there at 10. This was the game out there last year, and it may be the game out there this year. It's kind of at the early outset of that whole round robin that we're going to have middle of the season on in the Pac-12. Remember about a month ago we did that show, and I said, boom, boom, boom. Every week the Pac-12 is throwing these really good games at you if you're wise enough to actually look out there and ignore the reputation the conference has built and look at the teams this year. It's a really good collection of teams this year. It also could be a little record versus reality situation. And record versus reality happens sometimes when one team has played a front-loaded schedule and another team hasn't. So that team's already been bitten, and they're in wounded animal mode, and you got a team that's without blemish, and yet the team that's already been wounded looks like the more physical team, the more put-together team, the better functioning team. Well, sometimes it's just that they've been battle-tested more, and they've had a chance to be exposed more, and the other team's always had flaws. You just didn't see them because they hadn't had that water pressure applied quite yet. USC will have played Notre Dame the week before they play this game. So if there are situations where maybe USC physically still doesn't match up front, Notre Dame will go a decent way in exposing that. And if they don't get the job done, Utah will. And if neither of them get the job done, well, might we and might you guys in the Lincoln Riley hater community need to acknowledge, maybe a little bit better defensively this year? Maybe. Still got the same staff out there, so who knows? Maybe. USC to the Big Ten is going to see them play a lot more games of this caliber. And so I think the last thing on any Trojan fan's mind on their way out the door is let's continue to get put on skates against these more physical teams. No, thank you. Let's go to week 11. We got people in our building looking very much forward to this one. Michigan at Penn State. All the way in week 11. Yeah. Penn State's already played Ohio State by this point. Does anyone know the outcome there? Well, we will by the time this game is played. So our hinge is as follows. Either Penn State is in desperation survival mode, or they've got the brightest spotlight on them that they've had since James Franklin's been there. Because if they beat Ohio State, they are playing for the division championship in this game in all likelihood. I mean, if they beat Ohio State, they got Michigan coming into their building with an opportunity to wrap the East up, again, in all likelihood, and keep both of them out of the Big Ten championship game, and they got to hope for like a playoff at large bid or something like that, whatever we call that. So that's that. But also, this is the game last year where Michigan decided to hang 418 rushing yards. Not in the series history, guys. That was what happened on one Saturday afternoon last year, just assault. Ugh. So we don't want that. And when you look defensively at all three levels at what Manny Diaz is going to be able to throw out there on the field, and then you can also consider what Beaver Stadium sounds like when Michigan goes in there. Hard to imagine that happening again. But then again, my eyeballs couldn't believe what they were seeing last year, and it did happen. That is a big-time hinge game. You know, if Michigan wins that one, I don't really love saying this, that's their first major test of the year. Week 11, first major test. And then they've, of course, got Ohio State at the end of the year. If Michigan wins that one, of course, they're set up, and they got a lot of runway, probably some wiggle room. And so for obvious reasons, probably that game the most obvious, there are hinge components in that one for sure.